Today we're going to be drawing a rose. I'm going to do a pencil rose for this video. The second video will be a watercolor sketch version of this. So let's start with the pencils. We're going to be using a 2B, a 4B and a 9B pencil. You'll need an eraser, some nice smooth, good quality cartridge paper. And here we go. Let's find the view of the rose we like and let's get started. Choose which view you want. I mean, the obvious one would be looking straight into it with the stamen. You can push the petals back a bit, or you could do a slight angle, might want to include the leaves. Just position it how you want. I'm probably going to do something a bit like, I think a bit like that. Now, when I position this rose like that, you can see it that way. But for me to be able to see it that way, I've got to tilt it because obviously you're doing a bird's eye view with the camera. So I've got to angle it so I can see it at the same view. So I'm going to put the rose over here. I'm setting it up in the corner. And then I'm going to work out, first of all, am I going to work landscape or portrait? Now, for this, I'm going to work landscape. And I'm going to rough out with my 2B pencil where I roughly want my composition to be on the page. Now, this is called gestural drawing. It's very, very rough. So the flower is actually going to go off, which is quite nice. So I'm just roughly working out where this flower is going to go. It's very, very rough. You can go for the major events in it. So that would be my starting point, actually. That would be my starting point. Very rough. Then what I do is I get my rubber and I rub back the lines so they're not so dominant because they're just very loose guidelines. Like that. So you make sure your pencils are nice and sharp. Might use my other pencil actually because I quite like this one. Sometimes I get quite fond of pencils. Sounds a bit odd, but okay. So now what I'm going to do is now I've roughed it in, I'm going to find an area that appeals to me. You've got to enjoy drawing. So start with a petal or something that you like. So I'm going to start with this lovely big one here. And I'm just using more of the side of my pencil to map out where things are. So it's like a second mapping, if you like. Here. Go work your way around the rose, but just really enjoying it and trying to get a sense of the shape of it as you draw. It sounds a bit odd, but you need to think about almost how that petal that you're drawing would feel if you touched it. What sort of sense it would have. Is it soft? Is it a bit more pert? It's like making a jigsaw puzzle of everything going together. Now, as I said, my angle is different to your angle. And then rub out what you don't need. Okay, so I'm beginning to get that. And then I'm going to go for the leaves. So I've got one down here, which is tucked behind that one. And that goes up there. This one comes out quite proudly, like that. And then I have to move the rose a bit there. And then this one comes up more proudly. This one's actually going to go right to the edge of the page, like that. And then this one has got a sort of connection to the flower. It's sort of protecting it almost, sort of right behind it, like that. Right. So I'm beginning to get that, beginning to get into it. Now, the next stage is to insert the shadows. So I'm going to use the side of the 2B pencil and I'm going to generally shade all over the flower, all over. Even though it's white, I'm going to shade all over the flower and the leaves. and the leaves. This just gets rid of the blank paper, bare paper, and it allows you to have a sort of foundation or a ground for your drawing. Okay, so I'm getting there. That's stage 2. Now I'm going to go for the even darker shadows using the side of my pencil. I'm holding it differently now. I'm going for the much darker shadows where I can find them. I'm just blocking them in. So if you squint your eyes, it makes it a bit easier to see these. You can exaggerate them as well. Always, don't worry about exaggerating. It's fine to do that. So I'll come back in a second when I've done all of those. Once you've done the lighter shading and the darker shading, you can now go for the middle shading. So if we think about values, which we've talked about before, if you've got the value scale, which you should use 9 different values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oops. Okay, so you're going to go from the darkest darks to the lightest lights. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's going to be from dark, getting lighter, and so on till we reach the end. And these are called values. Now, in this drawing, we've probably used around number 8 for here. No, about number 7, sorry, for here. And number probably around 2 for the lighter tones. We want to go to these tones in the middle now. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go back in and I'm going to add in some slightly darker areas. They're not as dark as the other ones, but they're just a bit darker. And what that does is it builds a gap, a bridge between the gap of the dark and the light. So you're increasing your values as you go around the rows. And what happens with this is it starts to become more 3D, more three-dimensional, because 3D drawings, or drawings that look quite 3D, have got a good range of values, so it gives us the depth. Okay. Now I'm going to go back in with my 9B pencil and I'm going to go even darker on the darks. So I'm going to find those using a 9B. I'm going to go right in there and really go strong on the shadows. And you can always blend with your finger as you go so everything smooths together. You can use a blending stick instead if you'd rather, or even a piece of paper. It pays off to go quite dramatic, even though it's white, the rose, it pays off to go quite dramatic on the darks. Right, so I'm building it up and I'm going to do the same with the leaves as well. I can hold it on the side, makes it easier to be smoother. And some of these shadows are emphasizing the channels or the veins in the leaves, showing me where the veins are. And the same for this one. That's quite dark there. And there's dark in there. So work your way around the flower and the leaves, going much darker than you thought you would. And what happens is you start to get more form, more of the shape of everything, or the form of it, which is the more 3D feeling. Okay, so blending it back, blending it back, blending it back. Once you've done that, you can go and get your lights. So you can use a rubber like this or one on the end of a pencil. Make sure it's a white rubber. And then we're going to go back in and start to bring out some of these lights. Let's find where they are. Let's get those back. Some of those lights that we've lost just by rubbing off. That. It's quite satisfying finding where the light is. And the same for the leaves as well. There's the light in it. And this is where you can actually start to show the more of the form of the leaf, because the light's going to fall in those channels where the leaves are, covered in the veins. So at this stage, what I tend to do is I tend to give it quite a dark background. And what that does, I'm just adjusting the camera a bit, is for a white object, really helps to make it feel white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a really nice, strong, dark pencil. And I'm going to use the side of it and go in big and bold like this around my flower. And what that does is it allows the flower to what we call pop. And go around the leaves as well. And it also gets rid of the outlines of things which you don't really want. So I'll come back to you in a minute when I've done all of this. So you can see I've started to block in the background, and what that does is it brings the flower to life a bit more. You can see now in relation to the background, this looks like it could be white. We're not there yet, but we're just beginning to build it up. I'm using a very textured background. I've used the side of my pencil, gone in different directions. It sort of brings it to life a bit in the background. Now what I'm going to do is make sure I've got a nice sharp pencil with a long lead on it. And then I'm using a 2B, and I'm going to go back in and start to instate some of the detail of the flower and the leaves. So I'm going to put in some lines where they some of the detail of the veins, like this. Because you've done the work of putting in the background, you can actually start to put in detail, and it can be supported by all the work you've done underneath. Okay, so you can see it can really start to come to life now. And the same for the flower as well. I'm going to put in some stamen in here. I'm going to add in some lines. because I can, because I've got the underneath to support it. If I didn't do all of that work, I wouldn't be able to put in these lines because they would just look too cartoony. Cut. I'm now putting some details in with lines because I've done all the shading underneath. I can get away with doing these lines because they don't stand out quite so much as they would have done if I hadn't have done all the work underneath. I'm not going to go massively detailed on this because I quite like it being a little bit loose. But you can see on the leaf here, I can start to have some more detail. And the same for this one here. And then I can use the background to get some of those sort of spikier bits along the edge of the leaf, so I can darken around it. That. So the background supports the shape. And then just blend it back in. So for the background, I use the side of the pencil, and for the detail, I'm using the tip of the pencil. So it's really starting to come to life now. You don't have to do a textured background. You could keep it smoother, but I quite like giving it a bit of oomph. Just gives it a bit more life. Instead of just being a bland background, you can make it a bit more substantial. Not quite finished yet, but you get the idea. You've built up the layers, you've built up the values, you're just starting to put in the detail at the end. You've also included taking the light bits off with an eraser, and that's how I would build up my drawing, and I'd probably spend another hour on it just fiddling around. Anyway, hope that's helpful. That's the drawn rose with pencils 2B, 4B, and 9B. So for the next flower, I'm going to do a watercolor flower. And what I'm going to do is a very loose, sort of abstract watercolor flower. So what I'm going to do is choose some colors. I'm going to go for yellow ochre, a bit of Payne's grey, a bit of cadmium yellow, a little bit of violet, and tiny bit of green actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the lightest colour first, which is the yellow ochre, and I'm just going to do a very general sort of splurge of colour. See, and I'm going to mix a bit of Payne's grey in, which gives it a nice sort of dirty tone, and then just generically or generally put that down like this in a sort of flowerish way. And then I'm going to use some tissue paper to dab off and get some light back in. So I'm just going for a sort of generic, general sort of tone of watercolor, very pale. And then, of course, you will have chosen your angle or view of the flower. I'm going to go in with some, add a bit of yellow. You can use that mix still and add in a bit of yellow into it. And then again, just it's almost like I'm drawing the flower, but with these general sort of coatings of layers of colour. And then I'm going to put in, I can see a tiny bit of green in those flowers, a little bit of sap green into that mix. And that's sort of in there. Okay, so I've just got a very general feel to that. And that's all you need to start with. And then I'm going to dab it off. So what we got then is an undercoat for the flower. And then we can do our detail on top. A bit like with the drawing exercise that I did in an earlier video, where you have an undercoat of what you need to then apply the detail on top of. You can see it's very, very pale. Very, very pale, a very watery wash. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit bolder with some of the colours. So I'm going to go for a warmer colour. I'm going to mix a bit of orange in with some yellow ochre. And that's going to go in that general sort of stamen area, like that. And then I can see a bit of that same colour following through, like that. And then again with your tissue, just dab it off. And again, this is just to give you a sort of generalized feel of the flower beneath. Once you've done that, you can go in with a smaller brush, because the brush I was using was quite large, actually, it's size 10. You can go in with a smaller brush and start to get in a bit more detail. When I say smaller, it could be a number 6 or a number 4. And now I'm going to go in and I can now put in a bit of the Payne's Grey. I've got some here actually, so I'm going to just use that. A bit of the Payne's Grey mixed in with that, so it goes quite a lot darker. That was that mix I just used, which had a bit of green in. So you can sort of like mix up colours that you've got on your palette. There you are, so I've got that sort of greyish colour. Even got a bit of violet over here. I'm going to mix that in here, like that. And now what I can do is I can start to put in some of the shadows. So those shadows are like that. Just some of the shadows. And then again, go back in with your tissue and dab them off, so they're not so bold. So beginning to get a little bit of depth now. Now I can actually begin the details. So I'm going to go in for stronger shadows, which will give me some detail. So the stronger shadows are going to be around here. Yeah. Yeah. Put in those stronger shadows wherever you can see them. That. And once again, dab them off. We don't want to go too full on with this too quickly. We want to sort of savor it, do it slowly. Okay. Okay, now I've gone to a much smaller brush. This is actually a size 0. brush sizes do vary a lot depending on the companies that you buy them from. I'm now going to go in with a bit of yellow mixed into that grey. I'm mixing cadmium yellow and grey. I'm going to put it over here. I'm going from I want a slightly lighter version of it, so I'm going to come over here now. And this is going to be for my detail. So now I'm going to go in and start to get some of these details in. Just slowly working my way around and getting these details in. And because I've got the foundation of all the colour underneath, I can get away with doing this outlining. Not the only way to do watercolour. You don't have to do this. I'm using it more like a sort of drawing method on top. And it certainly isn't, a sort of particularly standard way of doing it, but it's quite nice for the white rose. And it slowly starts to come together. And of course, not all of the colour you've selected will be necessary. So it's quite nice. It's coming together slowly. Um, and as I say, you don't necessarily have to do it this way. Botanical painters wouldn't do this. More precise sort of watercolor enthusiasts might not do it this way, but I'm doing it this way because I think it's quite a nice way of working. Okay, so I've got the general feel of it. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to be using colouring pencil. The colouring pencil on this will look really, really nice. Colouring pencil. Okay. So I've got this lovely sort of what's called sandstone, but it's a really beautiful colour actually. And I'm going to use this to go back in. Now, wait for it to dry fully. So I'm just adding little bits here and there and going into it. I can see some nice colours in there. And I can see a yellow, so I need to get the yellow. Got a lot of yellow in here actually. You have to make sure your paper's totally dry. You're just adding in a few embellishments. There's a beautiful glow of yellow on these petals. And just working your way around the whole rose, adding in the yellow where you can see it, and you can see it starting to come to life. I can also see a sort of a bluey tinge. I've got a blue. I can see some sort of bluey pattern in here. There's so many colours once you start looking. There's so much going on with this. Go very gentle, not too much, less is more. And with colouring pencils, there's no two ways about it. The better quality ones are more expensive. And even though it's a white, even though it's white, there are just so many colours that it isn't really white. There's so much going on in here. It's just, wow, it's just unbelievable when you start looking. It's building it up. So if you get areas that you don't like or are too stripy, or you can always go back in with your brush and blend them back in again. Most colouring pencils are water soluble, except for the oil-based ones, which aren't. And the oil-based ones are the really expensive ones that blend really beautifully. Most colouring pencils that you buy in most art shops are wax-based. But you can always use watercolour pencils too. And what's nice about these is you can sort of, you see I've blended that back a little bit. So you're just working back and forth, back and forth. And I'm actually going to see if I can find a violet. Oh, I've got one here. Great. Because there's a beautiful quality of violet in here. And I'm not sure if you can actually see it on this camera. Probably can't. But I can see violet in here. So I'm going to go a bit of violet. If you look at Sargent's Whites and Altadena and people like that, just the way that they handled working with white fabric is to die for. It's absolutely beautiful. Because once you start doing whites, there's so much you can see in it. It's rather beautiful. Time consuming because you can't really sort of like bash it out. And it's quite addictive because there is so much going on that it's hard to know when to stop. I think purple or violet, rather, sorry, violet, which is more of a blue colour. Just so you know, violet is on the blue side and purple is on the red side. So violet is a really beautiful colour to put into white. It just works beautifully. See if that's coming to life a little bit now. can also see that blue again, but I'm going to go back in first of all with a bit of yellow because I can add a bit more yellow into this center for where the stamen's going to go. That can take a lot more of that yellowy colour in there. And I think I can put a bit more yellow. I can also see green. There's a green in there. Oh, I'm going to put some green in. Okay, so I can see a bit of green in here. I might need to blend this back because this pencil is a little bit harsh, but let's see if that works. It's not too bad actually. And there's a bit of green in here. So what we're going to do now is we are going to add the stamen. And that's got a sort of gingery red, which is like an ochre. So I'm going to put in a sort of little dots like this of some red. Get in there. And we're going to use a normal graphite pencil at the end as well. So some red. And I'm also going to put in some orange. Cut. For the orange, I'm going to put in a tiny, tiny little dash of felt tip pen. Well, these are watercolor brushes, just a tiny dash. Don't want to overdo it. Like that. That's gorgeous. Right, now it's all dry. I can go back in with a very sharp 2B pencil. Nice sharp pencil. And this is where I can actually start to define and sharpen things up more, and I can get the staining shapes in. There's some sort of little odd little fairy bits on those. That. And you can also use the graphite on the side like that and get some extra shading if you need it. Like that. It's quite useful. If you've missed any shadows out and you want to put them back in, I'm using the side of the pencil like that. In. Lovely shapes in. Each petal is different, and you have to honor that. You have to really honor that, and make sure that you treasure each part of it. You know, the little tears and the tucks. Really enjoy finding out how each one is formed. Nature's beauty. And bit by bit, you can see it's coming to life. Okay, so rub it back, make sure it's smooth back. You can always go back in and go sharper afterwards. And then I'd consider putting in a background of some sort. But for now, I think I would probably stop there for now and then think about what I wanted to do to it afterwards. But a nice beginning to doing the painted watercolor flower.